Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Sham Sharadava Nalalida Loka Tranaya Karuna Gana Ganatam Praptasya Kalyanam Durnanavasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Praptasya Durnanavasya Vande Guru Shri Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitya Gita Vaditramadhyam Manasura Sena Romanchakam Pasru Taranga Vajo Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Vigrahara Tana Nityanana Shingara Tanama Diramarjanado Shri Juktasya Bhaktamsya Niyunjatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Chaturvidha Shri Bhagavat Prasado Satvana Traptan Hari Bhakta Sangam Kripaiva Trapte Bhajata Sadeva Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shiradikama Dabayara Para Madhurya Leela Gunarupanam Pratichanasa Dhanalalupasa Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Ne kunjayuno Rati Kelisidhai Rajali Virjukti Apekshaniya Tatrati Daksha Ativalabhasa Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Chadhari Vena Shamasta Shashri Ruktastatava Gataiva Sadhvi
Asamasta Sashri Yuktastatava Vyaviteva Sadhvi
Kintu Praborja Priya Eva Tasya Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam
Prabhuya Priya Tasya Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam
Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam
Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam
Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Prasadam Nagati Kutapi
Yasya Prasada Bhagavat Prasada Yasya Prasada Nagati Kutapi
Dhyayam Stuvam Tasa Yasatri Sandhyam Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Dhyayam Stuvam Tasa Yasatri Sandhyam Vande Gurashi Charanarvindam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namo Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanavadi Vachatari Shatarine
Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Shivishesha Shunyavadi Askatya Desatarine
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Namamishwaram Sachidanandarupam Lasatkundalam Gokule Brajamanam
Namamishwaram Sachidanandarupam Lasatkundalam Gokule Brajamanam
यशोदाभियुलुखलादवमानं परमस्मृतमत्यन्तो धृत्य गोप्या
यशोदभियोलुकलादवमानं परं कृष्णम् आद्यन्तो धृत्य गोप्या
रुदन्तं मुहुर्नेत्रयुग्मं मृजन्तम् करं भुजयुग्मेन सातङ्कनेत्रम्
मुहुर्नेत्रयुग्मं मृजन्तम् करं भुजयुग्मेन सातङ्कनेत्रम्
मुहुश्वासकं पात्रीरेखाङ्ककन्था स्थितग्रेवं दामोदरं भक्तिबद्धम्
स्थितग्रेवं दामोदरं भक्तिबद्धम्
इति द्रक्ष्वलीलाभियानन्दकुण्डे स्वघोषं निमाजन्तमख्यपयन्तम्
दृक्ष्वालीलाभिरमन्तकुन्दे स्वगोस्समीमहजन्त्यम् आज्ञापयन्तम्
तदीयसितानेषु भक्तजिता त्वं पुनः प्रेमातस्तं सतावृति वन्दे
तदीयसितः गेषु भक्तजितात्वं पुनः प्रेमतस्तं सतावृति वन्दे
वरं देवा मोक्षं न मोक्षं वदिं वा न चन्यं वर्णेऽहं वरे सदपिह
वरं देवा मोक्षं न मोक्षावधिं वा न चन्यविनेहं वरे सदपिह
इदं ते वपुर्नाथ गोपालबालम् सदा मे मानसि वीरस्तं किमन्ये
इदं ते वपुर्नाथ गोपालबालम् सदा मे मनसा वीरस्तं किमन्ये
इदं ते मुखं भोजम् अत्यन्तनीले घृतं कुन्तले स्निग्धरक्तस्य गोप्या
इदं ते मुखं भोजम् अत्यन्तनीले वितं कुन्तलः स्निग्धरक्तश्च गोप्या
मुहुश्चुम्बितं बिम्बरक्ताधरं मे मनसि वीरस्तमलं लक्ष्यलभे
मुहुश्चुम्बितं बिम्ब रक्तं धरम्बे मनसा वीरस्तं मलं लक्ष्यलभे
नमो देवा दामोदरानन्त विष्णु प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजलब्धिमग्नम्
प्रसीद प्रभो दुःखजलब्धिमग्नम्
कृपादृष्टिवृष्ट्यातिदिनं बतानु ग्रहनिशामामग्नामिति अक्षिदृश्या
दृष्टिविष्टियातिदिनं बतानु गेहानिशममग्नम् इति अक्षिदृश्या
कुबेरात्मजो बद्धमूर्त्येवा यद्वत् त्वया मोचिता भक्ति भज कृतो च
त्वया मोचितो भक्ति प्रमोदितो च
तथा प्रेमा भक्तिं स्वकं प्रयच्छ न मोक्षे ग्रहो मे दामोदरेह
भक्तिं स्वकं प्रयच्छ
तेस्तु धाम्ने स्फुरदीप्तिधाम्ने कृतियोधराय था विश्वशधाम्ने
Namaste Sudhamne Spurabdiptidhamne Adiyodarayata Vishwasadhamne
Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam
Namo Radhikaya Tvadiya Priyaya Namo Nantalilaya Devaya Tubhyam
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Jaya Radha Damodar Radha Damodar Radha Damodar Radha
Damodar Radha Damodar Radhe
Jaya Gauranitai 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 Jaya Gauranitai
Jaya Gauranitai 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 Jaya Gauranitai
Jaya Radha Nila Madhav Radha Nila Madhav Radhe
Madhurada Nila Madhurade
Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra
Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha
Jaya Narasimhadev 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 Jaya Narasimhadev
Jaya Narasinghadev Jaya Narasinghadev Narasinghadev Jaya Narasinghadev
Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Jaya Lakshman Hanuman
Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Sitaram Jaya Hanuman
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jayom Vishnupad Paramanza Pararajagachasta Tarasa Tirishi Shishimadis Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai Namacharya Silaridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikho Krishna Chaitanya Pavanitananda Sri Dvaita Radha Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Samkunda Radha Kunda Kiri Govardhana Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Shri Mayapura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Ganga Maya Ki Jai Jamuna Maya Ki Jai Samavela Bhaktivinda Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande all glories to assembled all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Damodarastakam Ki Jai
Namaste Narasimhaya
Namaste Narasimhaya
Namaste Narasimhaya
Namaste Narasimhaya
Prahlada Ladadaine
Prahlada Ladadaine
प्रहलाद लाददायिने हिरण्याकाशे पूर्वक्षः शीलतङ्कानखालाये हितो नरसिंहा परतो नरसिंहो यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहा बहिर्नरसिंहो हृदये नरसिंहो नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपदे तव करकमलवरे नाखामदुतशृङ्गां दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गां केशवधृता नरहरे रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जयो केशवधृता नरहरे रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे केशवधृता नरहरि रूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो नरसिंहदेव जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो प्रहलाद महाराज जयो जयो प्रभुपाद 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 जयो जयो प्रभुपाद जयो जयो गुरुदेव 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 जयो जयो गुरुदेव निथाय गौर हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निथाय गौर हरि बोल
तुलसी देवी महारानी की जय सिंह देव भगवान की जय तुलसी देवी महारानी की जय वृंदाये तुलसी देवाय प्रियाये केशवस्य च विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यव्रताय नमो नमः वृंदाये तुलसी देवाय प्रियाये केशवस्य च विष्णु भक्ति प्रदे देवी सत्यव्रताय नमो नमः Vrindaye Tulsidevaye Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Pradidevi Satyvrataye Namo Namaha. Vrindaye Tulsidevi Maharani Ki Jai.
Krishna Priyasi Namo Namaha.
Shri Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Radha Krishna Seva Pabo Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pabo Abhilashi.
Radha Krishna Seva Pava Abhilashi.
Ye tomar sharan loy tara vanch purna ho. Rupa kori koro tare Vrindavan vasi. Vilas kunj diyo vasu. Nayane heri bosada jugal ruparashi. निवेदन धरो सखीरनुगता करो. निवेदन धरो सखीरनुगता करो. सेवा अधिकारा दिए करो निज दासी. सेवा अधिकारा दिए करो निज दासी. दीन कृष्ण दासे को ए जे नामोरा होय. श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेम सदा येन भाषी. श्री राधा गोविंदा प्रेमे सदा येन भाषी. Tulasi Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Shri Krishna Preyasi Namo Namaha.
Yani kani cha papani brahma tyadikani cha tani tani pranashanti pradakshina pade pade.
Yani kani cha papani brahma tyadikani cha tani tani pranashanti pradakshina pade pade.
Yani kani cha papani brahma tyadikani cha tani tani pranashanti pradakshina pade pade.
Yani kani japa pani brahma hasta kani cha kani pani sande varikshana vade vade
यानि कानि चाप पानि ब्रह्म हत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे
Yani kani japa pani brahma hasta kani cha kani pani sande varikshana vade vade
कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम हरे राम 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 हरे हरे हरे
Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Rama
हरे
Hare
हरे
Hare
हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा
Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Rama
हरे
Hare
हरे
Hare
जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी जय वृंदा देवी
Jaya Vrinda Devi Jaya Vrinda Devi Jaya Vrinda
देवी
Devi
जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी महारानी जय तुलसी
Maharani Jaya Tulsi Maharani Jaya Tulsi
महारानी नित्य गौरा हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि बोल नित्य गौरा हरि
Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Padi Devi Satirata Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Padi Devi Satirata Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devaya Priyaye Keshavasya Cha Vishnu Bhakti Padi Devi Satirata Namo Namaha Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai Namaste Saraswati Devi Guruvani Pacharani Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskati Desatani Krishna. Whoever takes shelter of you has his wishes fulfilled. Bestowing your mercy upon him, you have been resident on top. My desire is to also grant you residence in the
Thus, within my vision, I will always behold the orthodox and Torah and Krishna. I beg to make me a follower of Kavita's Raj. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me own man servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna praise. May I always swim in love Shri Radha and Govind. Shri Mati Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kristakam Ki Jai. Chaito Darpanamajanam Avamadavanilvapanam Shri Akari Vachandika Vitaranam Vidyavadhu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Pratiparam Purnam Taswadanam Savatmasnam Paramparam Vijayati Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakari Baudani Sarva Shaktis Tatrarpita Niyamita Smarane Nakala एतादृशी तव कृपया भगवन् ममापि दुर्दैवमीदृशं याचनेनानुरागः कृणारपि सुनिचैन तरोरपि सहिष्णुना अमानिनमानदेन कीर्तनीया सदा हरि न धनं न जनं न सुन्दरीं कवितं वा जगरिषकामये मम जन्मनि जन्मनीश्वरे भवतार्भक्तिरायितुके त्वयि अयि नन्दतनुजकिङ्करं परितमां विस्मये भवम्बुधौ कृपया तव पादपङ्कजस्थितदुले सदृशं विचिन्तया नयनं गलोरश्रुधारया वादनं गद्गदहृदया गिरा पुराकारिचितं बभूकर तव नाम ग्रहणे भविष्यति जुगायितं निमिषेण चक्षुषा प्रविशयितं शून्यायितं जगत् सर्वं गोविन्दविरहेण मे अश्लीषवापादरतं पिनस्तमम् अदर्शनान्महतं करोतु वा यथा तथा वा विददातु लम्पतो मत्प्राणतस्तु सैव न परः हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। श्री चैतन्य महाप्रभु श्री कृष्ण की जय। नमो वरनाय कृष्ण प्रेम कृष्ण। Glory to the Shri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditioned life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana is the prime benediction for humanity at large. God is praised to raise the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss and enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus your hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all transcendental energies. It is not even hard and fast rule for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by holy names. But I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name with the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself a Lord and strong in street, one should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaj Nanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yes, some rather I'm following this ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms at your lotus feet. O my Lord, or will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? Or will my voice choke up, and will the hairs of my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he sure remains so. Even if Sandra me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, he is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord, unconditionally. Shri Krishna ki. There are 10 offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided. They are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the Lord is to dedicate a life of propagating the holy name of the Lord. 2. Cancel the names of demigods, Lord Shiva,
Lord Brahma, to be equal to or independent names.
the name of Lord Vishnu. 3.
Disobey the orders of the spiritual master.
4. Blaspheme the Vedic literature or literatures of pursuance of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to the imagination. 6. To give some interpretation of the holy name of the Lord. 7. To make simple activities on strength chanting the holy name of the Lord. 8. Consider chanting Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruitive activity karma kanda. 9. To strike a fearless person by the glories of the holy name. And 10. To not have complete faith in chanting the holy names and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It also an offense to be retained while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to achieve the desired success. Krishna. Now let us offer our most humble obeisance to all the Vaishnavas, devotees of the Lord. They are just like desired trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for all conditions and souls.
Panchkalpatarabhischa kripa sindhu bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Vaishnava Thakur Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Shrimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So because this is Damodarastakam, we're going to go directly to Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is Canto 2, Chapter 7, verse number 33. And Kridam Vane Nisi Nisakara Rasmi Goryam Rason Vaka Kalapadayata Murchitena Udipitak Smararujam Rajabrid Vadunam Hatur Harisyati Sirodana Danuragasya. Kridan, while engaged in his pastimes. Vane, in the forest of Vrindavana. Nishi, nocturnal. Nisakara, the moon. Rasmi Goryam, white moonshine. Rasa Unmukaha, desiring to dance with. Kalapadayata, accompanied by sweet songs. Murchitena, and melodious music. Udipita, awakened. Smara Rujam, sexual desires. Raja, Rajabrit, the inhabitants of Rajabhumi. Vadunam, of the wives. Hartu, of the kidnappers. Harishyati, will vanquish. Shira, the head. Danada, Anugasya, of the follower of the rich Kuvera. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. When the Lord was engaged in his pastimes of the rasa dance in the forest of Vrindavana, enlivening the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavana by sweet and melodious songs, a demon of the name Sankakuda, a rich follower of the treasure of heaven, Kuvera, kidnapped the damsels, and the Lord severed his head from his trunk. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We should carefully note that the statements described herein are the statements of Brahmaji to Narada. And he was speaking to Narada of events that would happen in the future, during the advent of Lord Krishna. The pastimes of the Lord are known to the experts who are able to see past, present, and future. And Brahmaji, being one of them, foretold what would happen in the future. The killing of Sankakuda by the Lord is a more recent incident after the Rasa Lila, and not exactly a simultaneous affair. In the previous verses, we have seen also that the Lord's engagement in the affairs of the forest fire was described along with his pastimes of punishing the Kaliya snake. And similarly, the pastimes of the Rasa dancer and the killing of Sankakuda are also described herein. The adjustment is that all these incidents would take place in the future after the time when it was being foretold by Brahmaji to Narada. The demon Sankakuda was killed by the Lord during his pastimes at Horika in the month of Falguna, and the same ceremony is still observed in India by the burning of the effigy of Sankakuda one day prior to the Lord's pastime at Horika, generally known as Holi. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. When the Lord was engaged in the pastimes of the rasa dance in the forest of Vrindavana, enlivening the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavana by sweet and melodious songs, a demon of the name Sankakuda, a rich follower of the treasurer of heaven Kubera, kidnapped the damsels, and the Lord severed his head from his trunk.
There's a paragraph.
What?
There's one paragraph.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Generally, the future appearance and activities of the Lord or his incarnations are foretold in the scriptures, and thus the pseudo-incarnations are unable to cheat persons who are in knowledge of the events as they are described in the authoritative scriptures. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So here we see the difference between pure devotees and demons. The demons, especially when they're wealthy, are very lusty, and they always are entrapped by Maya. Even if they're looking at Krishna and the gopis. So here's a person who is present when Krishna is singing very sweet melodious songs, and he becomes lusty. Now, but his lust is based on sense gratification. Now, it's also said here that in the forest of Vrindavan, during the Rasa Lila dance, and Krishna was singing, it enlivened the sexual desires of the wives of the inhabitants of Vrindavana. Now, is there a difference between the statement of sexual desires of the gopis and the disgusting desires of Sankakuda? Yes, there's a major difference. And this is what is difficult to understand, because sometimes they use this word sexual desires referring to the gopis with Krishna. But it's not what we think it is, because everything in the spiritual world is pure, and everything in the material world is contaminated by the modes of material nature. So what is real love in the spiritual world is actually lust in the material world. So there's a difference between love and lust. This is explained also in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where it says, lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So, from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service to the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. So, this so-called sexual desires being aroused while the gopis were hearing Krishna's very melodious and sweet singing is different than the lusty desires of Sankakuda. And that's why this is only something that devotees can understand. A materialist who reads this will say, oh, well, it's the same thing as here in the material world. See, right away, that's called they are projecting their own contamination onto the pastimes of the Lord. Whereas if we hear the explanation of the acharyas, then we don't make that mistake. What is the mistake? It's projecting our misconceptions onto the Lord. Now, how do we understand this? First of all, in the spiritual world, everything is eternal. So there's no need for procreation there. Whereas in the material world, there's a fervent need for procreation. And in the spiritual world, if something is described as sexual, it's based on the looks and gestures and sweet singing and dancing rather than what we would consider sexual in the material world, which is intercourse and things like that. Now, this is impossible for materialistic people to understand because the same word is being used. But when we understand that everything in the material world is a perverted reflection of what is in the spiritual world. So what is a perverted reflection? It means, like, for example, if you go into the House of Mirrors in a, like in Disneyland or some type of, a place where they have all these, like a county fair or something like that. Well, when you go into the House of Mirrors, you see yourself in many different mirrors, and those mirrors are so made that your image is distorted. Have you ever done that? Have you ever? Yeah. It's severely distorted, right? So you're seeing yourself, but you look like 10 times fatter, or 5 times thinner, or 8 times longer, or 7 times shorter, or whatever, And but it's you, but it's purposely made to see yourself distorted. Well, that's what we see in the material world. We're not seeing the real thing. We're seeing a very distorted, perverted image of what's in the spiritual world. However, that can be purified, as Prabhupada explains, through devotional service and the association of devotees and the process of Krishna consciousness, following the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness and regularly hearing. That perverted vision, that perverted understanding can be purified. And you'll see that the so-called sexual things in the spiritual world are not based on procreation or sense gratification. They're based on exhilarating transcendental emotions that are triggered by the eyebrows and facial looks, and also by gestures and by singing and dancing and things like that. And one feels transcendental ecstasies in the association of the Lord. Whereas in the material world, it's a very gross thing based on, as Prabhupada describes it, 2 bodies flapping together. Anyway, it's not the same thing. And this takes time to understand. So therefore, we see that especially Sankakuda was very wealthy. He was, some kind of a follower of Kubera, who is the treasurer of the demigods in the material world. Well, too much money is actually a curse. We're not supposed to collect more than we need. If we do that and use that excess in the service of Krishna, we're not affected. If we just hoard it and use it for sense gratification, we become entrapped in the whole cycle of birth and death for many, many innumerable lifetimes. So there was once this famous American author, Mark Twain, he said, actually no, it was Napoleon. He had a saying. He came up with a lot of proverbs. He said, money is a good servant and a bad master. So when we are, let's say, fortunate enough to have a lot of money, we should not use it for sense gratification. We should only use it in the service of Krishna. And we should be very charitable and very gracious, and used the money in the service of spreading Krishna consciousness and Sankirtan and food distribution, all those things. Otherwise, it's a curse. Collecting more than we need is a curse, and holding on to it is a curse. And look what happens. We see many very rich people, and they're getting caught engaged in all kinds of illicit sexual activity. You have Prince Andrew in the royal family. He was caught engaging in sexual activity with minor girls, and it's humiliating. In fact, his brother, Prince William, just said that my brother is jeopardizing the entire monarchy of the British Empire, right? Because he's going to be arrested soon and charged with molesting a minor. So we see Bill Gates, who used to be the best amongst the worst. He used to be the best billionaire because he was engaged in a lot of charitable work, because he had a nice wife and kids, and everyone looked up to him as the paradigm of a decent person. It turns out that he's a very low-class rogue, and he's using his wealth and his position to exploit women. So this money, it's very interesting that Sankakuda was rich. So what does Prabhupada say in another place? He says, the demon Sankakuda, he says here, generally the future appearance and activities of the Lord or his incarnations are foretold in the scriptures, and thus the pseudo-incarnations are unable to cheat persons who are in knowledge of the events as they are described in the authoritative scriptures. So if we read Srimad Bhagavatam, we will know what's going to happen in the future, and what are the incarnations of Krishna and how to recognize them. So that way, if you are trained in Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll not be cheated by the cheaters. Because in Kali Yuga, there are many people that claim to be incarnations of the Lord. And but if you know who are the scheduled incarnations, and if you know how to recognize an incarnation, you will not be fooled, because you've read Srimad Bhagavatam, you've discussed it, and here Brahma is explaining to Narada the future, what's going to happen. Now, there's another important point here. Let me see if I can find it. Because this Sankakuda is a very interesting person, because we can learn many things about today from understanding what happened to Sankakuda. And it says, one second. Okay, Sankakuda is not Sakata Asura. Sakata Asura was the cart demon. This Sankakuda is someone different. Huh? Yeah.
Is that was the chef of conch?
So he has a conch on his forehead. Yeah, Krishna stole it. Not stole. He killed him. He killed him and gave it to Balaram. Okay, so here I'm going to read something that's very interesting about him. It says, Krishna attacks Sankakuda. So the demon associated Kuvera, the treasure of the heavenly planets, appeared on the scene. This is during the Rasa Leela dance. The demon's name was Sankakuda because on his head there was a valuable jewel resembling a conch shell, just as the two sons of Kuvera were puffed up over their wealth and opulence and did not care for Narada Muni's presence. This Sankakuda was also puffed up over material opulence. He thought that Krishna and Balaram were two ordinary cowherd boys, enjoying the company of many beautiful girls. Now you see, this man is actually seeing the Rasa Leela dance and is misinterpreting it. So it doesn't mean just because you see something doesn't mean you understand what it is. Just like in the time of Jesus, many people saw Jesus. Only about 12 to 14 people understood that he was actually the Son of God. See? And even in Krishna's time, many people saw Krishna, and most of them did not understand that he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You had people like Sisupala, and you had people like the king of Kashi, and you have all these different people. You have Dravida Gorilla, and you have this Sankakuda. Generally, Prabhupada says, generally in the material world, a person with riches thinks that all beautiful women should be enjoyed by him. Sankakuda also thought that since he belonged to the rich community of Kuvera, he, not Krishna and Balaram, should enjoy the company of so many beautiful girls. He therefore decided to take charge of them. He appeared before Krishna and Balaram and the damsels of Vraja and began to lead the girls away to the north. He commanded them as if he were their proprietor and husband, despite the presence of Krishna and Balaram. Being forcibly taken away by Sankakuda, the damsels of Vraja called the names of Krishna and Balaram for protection. The two brothers immediately began to follow them, taking up big logs in their hands. Don't be afraid, they called to the gopis. We are coming at once to chastise this demon. Very quickly they reached Sankakuda. Thinking the brothers too powerful, Sankakuda left the company of the gopis and ran for fear for his life, but Krishna would not let him go. He entrusted the gopis to the care of Balarama and followed Sankakuda wherever he fled. Krishna wanted to take the valuable jewel resembling a conch shell from the head of the demon. After following him a very short distance, Krishna caught him, struck his head with his fist, and killed him. He then took the valuable jewel and returned. In the presence of all the damsels of Vraja, he presented the valuable jewel to his elder brother Balaram. And then in the Krishna book it says, the demon Sankakuda was killed by the Lord during his pastime at Horika in the month of Falguna, and the same ceremony is still observed in India by the burning of the effigy of Sankakuda one day prior to the Lord's pastimes at Horika, generally known as Holi. So we read that already. And then in the Srimad Bhagavatam also, which is what we read today. Okay, so here we see, this is the dilemma or the predicament of most rich men or rich women also. They think because of their riches, they have a right to have as much sense gratification as they want. And they become corrupted completely. And because of that, it ruins their life and it ruins their chance to be liberated. So therefore, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, Kama Krodha, Kama Esa Krodha Esa Raga Guna Samudbhavam Mahasana Mahapapma Vidi Enam Iha Vairinam. Translation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath or anger, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. So, when a child is born, they're not lusty. But as they grow up and begin to associate with the modes of material nature and people in the different modes of material nature, they gradually develop the natural love that is normal for a sane person is transformed into lust and become crazy. The rest of their life, they're just always seeking lusty relationships, and it ruins their life. So it's imperative, because Prabhupada said in the purport, when lust is transformed, when the love is transformed into lust, it's very difficult to come back to love. Very, very difficult. It's possible, but it's very difficult. He says here, It says, but if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nevertheless, or nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So, this all-devouring enemy, Prabhupada explains, when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his or her eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath or anger. Wrath or anger is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity. And it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Anger is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as anger and other corollaries. If, therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath or anger by the spiritual attachment. So, you see this, when a person starts getting angry, and it starts early in life, it can begin even in childhood. When a child can get angry because you take their cell phone away from them, or you say you can't watch any more television for a week, or you say you're grounded, you have to stay in your room, and without your computer, without your cell phone, they get angry. And they've developed this terrible, let's say, influence of the mode of ignorance already in such a young age. Say. And imagine how it's increased when they go to the public schools or schools, and they're taught all kinds of nonsense things, and it just gets worse and worse. In fact, I was talking to Devanath yesterday, and he was explaining to me how, all the sales of certain products of Microsoft skyrocket in Christmas time. And I said, well, which one is the more famous or more, let's say, prominent? He said, well, it's the Xbox. Now, Xbox is the most nonsense thing a parent could buy for their kid. It is absolutely mind-destroying. That's why they call it the Xbox. You put a big X on Krishna consciousness when you buy the Xbox for your kid. And people are buying them like crazy in Christmas. And the thing is, he told me, and he said it's actually very strange. He said every year the same people buy the next level of Xbox, or the newest Xbox. He said, and he said it's like they're intoxicated with it, and it is an intoxicating thing. I mean, I've never had an Xbox myself. I just heard about it. Right? See, in the spiritual world, there are no demons. They just hear about them. You see? So, when here it says that this demon Sankakuda tried to take away the gopis, this happens in the material world during Krishna's pastimes. In the spiritual world, the same thing is there, but they only hear about it. There's no demons there. They only hear about the demons or what the demons are trying to do. So here we see that the whole educational system, the whole culture is based on transforming love of God to lust. That's the theme. And this is what's going on. And even the parents contribute to it, by buying Xboxes and all these gadgets so the kids come in contact with all kinds of nonsense people. As soon as a kid has a cell phone or a computer, they can come in contact with some of the lowest class people in the whole world, right? Because you have access to the internet. So what previously, when people were living in villages, there was no cell phones, there was no television, there was no Xbox, there was no radio. They grew up easily their whole life being Krishna conscious. Nowadays, with all those tremendous media instruments, kids can get contaminated even when they're like 3 or 4 years old. I mean, I've seen parents, in order to keep their kid busy, they give them their cell phone when they're only 2 years old, and the kid's playing with it, and eventually, by the time they're 3 or 4, they know how to use it, right? And then things pop up all the time on the cell phone, right? Sometimes very filthy things pop up. So they are introduced to this nonsense by their parents, you know, and oftentimes the parents will just give, because the kid sees the parent with a cell phone all the time, so it wants to get it in its hand. And even if they don't know how to use it, still they keep trying and trying until they figure it out. And they do figure it out over time. And then to buy them an Xbox or all these other gadgets, that is actually criminal. If you see, if you think that transforming love into lust is one of the worst things that could ever happen, and it is. And here it says, that so the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many of his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are part and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill their lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So here, there's 3 things explained in this one little paragraph, but if we understand those 3 things, we can be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Number 1 is that Krishna expands himself into infinite numbers of jivas to increase his transcendental pleasures and activities in reciprocal relationships with the jivas. Okay, so he says the Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of his spiritual bliss. Okay, so that's point 1. Point 2 is, they also, meaning you and me, jivas, or living entities, also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. Now, this is exactly what's happening today. This natural love of God, which is the constitutional position of a living entity, because we're all part and parcels of Krishna and his spiritual bliss. But by misuse of independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. And we see this when kids are growing up. At one point, you tell your kid, okay, now you can help me do this thing, or you can take out the trash, or you can, let's go to the temple. And they say, yeah, no problem. And they come. Then they get to a certain age where they start saying, no, I don't want to do it. Have you experienced this, Prabhu? Now, talk to Prabhuji behind you, because he hasn't experienced it yet. Is that right? Yeah. They listen to you, right? How old is your girl?
My daughter is 9.
Okay. So by the time she gets to be 12, 13, 14, get ready for the roller coaster, you know. She's going to tell you no at one point, you know, or I don't want to. I mean, I hope not. Let's put it like that. But say, I'm warning you, because this is what is being explained here. It says, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. So, we should always bring our children to the temple and do service with them. Now, our devotees have this bad habit is when the parents come to the temple, immediately they get involved in service and they ignore the kids, and the kids run wild. They're screaming, they're fighting, they're closed, they go into one of the rooms and they start fighting and talking nonsense, right? And now when new people come with their kids, those kids are well behaved because the parents, are watching them very carefully. They don't let them out of their eyes, right? And but then the kids see our kids running wild, right, and making noises and fighting and all this stuff, and the parents see that and they're a little confused. They're not sure whose kids these are. When they figure out that these are the kids of the devotees, they understand I'm not coming back here because I don't want my kids to be like that. You see, so it is actually a violation of the temple to bring your kids here and let them run wild in the temple. That should never happen. The kids should always be chaperoned by their parents in the temple, and ideally the kids should be serving with their parents. Now I see here, Prabhuji, is that a cell phone? Charan Prabhu, is that a cell phone? Yeah. Why do you leave it in front of him? Why don't you put it in your pocket? You see, this is the whole point. That instrument right there is a dangerous instrument. It's like giving your kid a gun. You give your kid a gun, they can kill themselves with it. You give them the cell phone, they can kill their Krishna consciousness with it. It is actually a weapon. It's weaponized to kill people's desire to serve Krishna and to be attached to sense gratification. So we have to understand what's going on in society. These instruments, when Steve Jobs first came out with the iPhone, he predicted that this iPhone will replace television and radio and the news and everything in people's lives. And he's right. It has done that, right? And it introduces, it's such a powerful instrument that you can go anywhere in the world with this thing nowadays. And you can contact anybody you want with it, right? So in the hands of a kid, this is lethal. Even in the hands of adults, it's lethal too, but it's worse for kids. They don't understand what's going on, you see. So it's like handing a kid a gun that's loaded and say, okay, play with it. Right? When they play with a gun that's loaded, they can kill themselves. Basically, they kill their desire to be Krishna conscious. And they start saying, no, I don't want to come to the temple. No, I don't want to do this. No, I don't want to do that. So here it says that everybody has partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill their lustful propensities, and when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. So this is what's happening. This is what's happening. We're seeing right in front of our eyes. This drama is taking place right in front of our eyes. Some of the richest men in the world are very low-class scumbags. And they're getting caught, and they're being humiliated. Even the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, got caught doing some of the most disgusting things right in the Oval Office, in the White House, right? And it became public. I don't know if you were here then, but everybody, all the school kids, everyone was hearing about his disgusting behavior with some woman that was not his wife in the White House, right? And he was not the only one. John F. Kennedy also is doing the same type of nonsense, and there are other presidents of the United States. And of course, there's the movie stars, and of course, there's the sports stars, and all these, and there's very rich people like Gates and Bezos. They're all doing the same thing, especially the ones that have a lot of money. Prince Andrew, another one. So this all pervasive in the society today. And unless we understand this, we're going to unwittingly expose our children to it. And what happens? The natural love for Krishna is transformed to lust. And lust, if you become lusty, then Krishna permits you to try and satisfy your unsatiable or insatiable lust. It's never really satisfied until you are completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities. That means this is what's happened to Harvey Weinstein and other people like that. Epstein was another one. He committed suicide. Harvey Weinstein is in prison right now, and he's going from one court case to another. So many people have accused him. It just goes on and on and on until they're totally, completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities. And then they may begin to inquire about their real position. So why go through that? Why subject yourself or subject your children to go through that horrible process? And it goes on life after life. So Prabhupada says this inquiry is the beginning of Vedanta Sutra. When we become totally frustrated by sense gratification, then we may begin to inquire, why am I suffering so much? But why go there? Why not avoid it? And Prabhupada says here that therefore the origin of lust, the origin of everything is the supreme Brahman, or Krishna. Therefore the origin of lust is also in the supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and anger can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Rama, exhibited his anger by burning the golden city of Ravana. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjuna to engage his anger upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, or when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. So, how can you engage lust and anger in the service of Krishna? Well, we see about anger, but how can you engage lust in the service of Krishna? Well, when you become lusty to know Krishna and to serve Krishna, then you've transformed lust. Okay, so this is a very deep subject, and in the third chapter, 39th verse, it goes even further. It says, thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus the material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. This is extremely, extremely heavy information. How do we deal with it? Well, we can see that the whole society today is planned, organized to make people lusty, because then they want to buy nice clothes, they want to buy nice cars, they want to buy big houses and boats and yachts and this and that. It's all a symbol of lust. Whereas Vyasadeva, whereas Gautam Muni, whereas Bharat Maharaj, they were living very simply. They didn't have all these gadgets and big houses and big this and big that. They lived very, very simply. And look what they did. They were able to do tremendous good things for humanity. So we should think about this, because there's love and there's lust. And when love becomes lust, it's very difficult to come back to Krishna consciousness. But it's possible in the association of genuine devotees and regularly hearing. The hearing is the most important thing to change one's mind from sense gratification to service to Krishna. Okay, we'll stop right there. Are there any questions? Hare Krishna. Yeah.
Well, you said in the first point that Krishna expands into many
Yeah.
souls, but at this other side also we say the soul is eternal. So how can if the soul is ever existing within?
No, soul has limited free will.
But if soul is eternal,
Yeah, soul is eternal, but do you want to be eternally a nonsense or eternally a good sense? See, because the soul is eternal, you could remain eternally, or we could remain eternally in the material world, because being attached to sense gratification. You understand that?
Yes.
You could be eternally in the material world, going birth after birth, because your soul is eternal. You know what the prayer is of all the atheists? You know what they pray also. You know what their prayer is? They pray. I don't know who they pray to, but they pray, please let there be nothing after I die. Why? Because they don't want to be held responsible for all the nonsense they do. And that's their prayer. I've talked to atheists, and they've told me, well, I have only one prayer. I pray that there's nothing after death. But there is, because the soul is eternal. So you could go on eternally suffering in all the 8,400,000 species of life and never get out of the process. And this is what's said in the 16th chapter. Listen to this. See, being eternal has its dangers. The danger is you could be eternally a nonsense. Okay? So now listen to this. This is in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And it says, Tamaham dvisata kruran samars resu naradamam shipam ajastram asubam asurisveva yonisu. Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, I perpetually means forever, right? Cast into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life. You know what that says? That says that if you remain attached to sense gratification, that you can eternally stay in the 8,400,000 species of life and suffer life after life. And he says in a purport, in this verse it is clearly indicated that the placing of a particular individual soul in a particular body is the prerogative of the Supreme Will. In other words, Krishna decides what body you're going to get next based on your karma, right? And if it's every time it's after a life of lusty behavior, you go over and over again into animal forms and insect forms and bird forms. You know. The demoniac person may not agree to accept the supremacy of the Lord, and it is a fact that he may act according to his own whims. But his next birth will depend upon the decision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not on himself. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, it is stated that an individual soul, after his death, is put into the womb of a mother where he gets a particular type of body under the supervision of superior power. Therefore, in the material existence, we find so many species of life, animals, insects, men, and so on. All are arranged by the superior power. They are not accidental. As for the demoniac, it is clearly said here that they are perpetually, that means always, forever, put into the wombs of demons. And thus, they continue to be envious, the lowest of mankind. Such demoniac species of men are held to be always full of lust, always violent and hateful, and always unclean. The many kinds of hunters in the jungle are considered to belong to the demoniac species of life. So, yes, you're right. The soul is eternal, but it's dangerous, Prabhu. A person can continually stay in the cycle of birth and death because the soul is eternal. It never dies. And the one prayer of the demons is, may there be nothing after I die. But that's not true. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. About the what? They pray to Gaia. They pray to, I don't know, their uncle or grandfather. Or they pray to the universe. They pray to the whale. You know, they don't know. They pray to nobody. You know, they don't know who they're praying to. They don't believe in God. See? So they'll find something to pray to. They pray to a demon, to a ghost. Yeah, one day at the food truck, I was talking to this one lady. Turned out she was a pretty smart lady. She was, she had a master's degree and she was going for a PhD or something. So as soon as I started talking a little bit about Krishna consciousness, she tuned out and she said, I'm an atheist. I said, okay. I said, still you should understand what the purpose of life is. So I know what the purpose of life is. You don't have to tell me. I want to live life to the fullest. That's the purpose of life. In other words, I want to have as much sense gratification as possible. That's what she meant, right? And she said, and my only prayer is that there's nothing after death. She clearly said it, And I said, why are you limiting yourself so much? She said, what do you mean limiting yourself? I said, you have the possibility of having eternal life. She said, I don't want that. I want to die. I want it all to be over. You see, this is a girl that's very highly educated. This is what they learn. They learn to be nihilistic people. That means nihilism is a big word. It means you have a very dark future. You think that everything will be finished when you die. And even when you're living, you live with that expectation that everything will be finished when I die. So, it's a very dangerous thing to be educated in this world today. I can show you what Prabhupada said. It's better not to be educated. Says that in the English language. Because if you're going to be educated in the demon's knowledge, just like Prahlad Maharaj, he refused to be educated